Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Good morning. Today it's one of our Not Everyone Drives episodes, and I'm here with Michael Wallis, and we're on Gubbi Gubbi country at the Caboolture Hub in one of the meeting rooms, so you might hear a little bit of background noise here and there. I met you, Michael, at one of the networking events because you have a business and you're in a wheelchair, so I wanted to find out what it's like for people who don't drive in the area, but you just told me that you do drive and you also have a business. So just talk a little bit about both of those.
Okay, good morning, Wendy. Thanks for inviting me to your podcast. I'm quite chuffed. I work for a company called Workplace Wisdom. I'm what you call a business concierge. Whether you want a light bulb or a fleet of Toyotas or 20 staff, you come and see me. I organise it from where to go, and obviously you pay for that, a fee for service, but I take all the hassle out of it. And I've just recently supplied a mining company with 20 new Prados in central Queensland. It was easier for them to just ring me and say, I know you've been in the mining industry, I need 20 Prados mine spec delivered by X date. I organise a quote, I organise the transport, I organise them to go to the sign writer to get the stickers put on, I organise them to go to the auto electrician to have the high-rise lights on. So it's a way-to-go service.
So you also help some fruit pickers?
Strawberry, blueberry, pineapple, ginger manufacturers with seasonal workers from overseas. So source the workers from Fiji or Vanuatu or Timor-Leste. Make sure all their visas and everything are correct. They've got their passports. Before they hop on the plane, make sure that all their accommodation is up to spec for the federal government. Then when they get here, pick them up at the airport, familiarise them with the local Caboolture surroundings. It's called pastoral care. I'm like their go-to person once they're here and ready to work. I'm the intermediary between them and the farmer. I make sure that their welfare is in check, and also that the farmer has got enough pickers to pick the strawberries or the blueberries or whatever crop he has.
And so those people, when they get here, do they have any transport problems?
The bus service, if they're outside of the inner Caboolture area, is non-existent. If they wanted to catch a bus to work, they can't, because a lot of the farms are Wamuran, Alimba, etc. So there's no bus service as such. There may be a bus that goes there once a day, but fruit pickers start very early in the morning, like a 5 o'clock start. There's no bus service anywhere that can get them there. Most of their accommodation was in houses in Caboolture or out of Caboolture. Again, the bus service is, they say there's buses there, but are they at the right times? Do they suit the pickers? A lot of the pickers don't speak a lot of English, and makes it hard for them to converse with a bus driver if they get to see a bus driver. So normally we used to buy 7-seater cars or 12-seater buses and make sure that they're licensed and they could get themselves around. But that was at great cost to the farmer and to the picker, because they had to pay for that.
And so what about, for instance, last night I was cycling home from Morayfield and there was somebody on a scooter. So are you finding that people are using the electric scooters to get around at all?
Yes, electric scooters are quite prominent. People are going to do something that's easy for them, easy to get at. So if they want to go to Macca's for a hamburger, and they're going to wait for a bus for an hour to go to Macca's and then wait another half an hour to get home, they've got a choice. They can walk, they can buy a scooter, or they can get a taxi. Catching a taxi is very good because it'll come to where you are and take you to where you want to go, but you pay for that privilege.
Yeah. And so what about the footpaths, when the places where the people live and where the farms are they on the road? Have you had any collisions where people have been very aggressive on the road or pushed them off the road or anything like that?
We went through a little phase where the workers decided that they would walk into town from a limber, and most of them are 20 times as fit as you and I. That wasn't the problem. What the problem was, they were walking along the road because there is no footpath.
Yeah, so this is a huge problem. People have this idea that, oh, well, I'll just walk on the footpath, but there's no footpath. This is why we have this podcast. It's to highlight the problems in the outer suburbs. It's really not the same as when you're in town or even in the inner suburbs. But once you're right on the edge of town, there are lots of places that haven't urbanised, and they won't put in the footpath until you've got developers paying for it. So that's the sort of...
That's right.
That's the issue. But you can wait 10, 15, 20 years for developers. And I think, well, what are people supposed to do in the meantime? So I would love to see organisations perhaps put grant funding forward to the council, because otherwise the council has to pay for it, but the council has so many other commitments too. So you're in a wheelchair.
Yes.
And you've been how many years in a wheelchair?
Since 2021.
Oh, it's quite recent then.
Yes.
Only 3 years. When you realised that you were going to be in a wheelchair, because there must have been times where you thought, oh no, maybe I'll get back to walking. In that transition and trying to adjust to everything that comes with that, including transportation, and so you would need a special car.
So I had to wait for the funding from NDIS to get my car modified. I had to buy a new car because they wouldn't modify my old car because it was too old. So I chose to buy a new car. So they modified it, put a wheelchair lift on it so I can get in and get out. What I find though is most of the wheelchair parks are too narrow. So even if I park right over towards the left-hand side of the park to allow for the wheelchair crane to come down, not enough room. And if the car beside me parks in, or while I'm out, if the car parks close, which in Morayfield, Caboolture is just about every day,
Yeah.
I'm stuck, I have to wait. So I choose for someone else to drive me. We still park in the handicap parks when we can get one. That's another problem.
I've heard this, having these podcasts, and I talk with people, and people just like really don't use disabled toilets, don't park in wheelchair places. It just makes it super hard for people who don't have an alternative. I think I've had that with pretty much everybody who has had mobility issues as part of their transportation issues. So, and you can't get on the bus service? Can you ever use the bus service?
I can use the bus service if I choose, but again, where I live in Woodford, the bus only comes whenever. So
there is a bus service that does go from Woodford into Caboolture.
Into Caboolture.
And it goes every morning or every evening?
There's services all day, but not regularly enough to suit me. And if I've got appointments at the hospital, you can't say, look, I'm really sorry, I need to get a bus. If you don't take the appointment that they give you, then you wait again. So again, I choose to have my support worker drive me. We can get as close as we can to where I need to go. Yeah. It's obvious that the person who designs the wheelchair parks has never been in a wheelchair.
And I think this is fundamental to the issue with transportation. So my observation and generally comments from people that I've been speaking with in these podcast series is that the people who design the system never use it. And it becomes really evident from things like, so my most confusing moment was when the bus stop number was the same, and it didn't matter which side of the road you were on, it was the same number, bus stop, and you're going, oh, well, there's the bus going past in the wrong direction. That's the one I was supposed to be on, but I've missed it, and now I've missed my next connection and my next connection and my next connection. So those are the sort of things that I've come across. But you can physically roll onto the bus.
Yes, they have the height adjustable new buses now, and I can roll onto there with some work.
Yep.
But again, I've got to make sure that I've allowed enough time And if I'm busy, which I am, I can't afford downtime. Downtime is money for me.
So when you say it takes time, is the route from Woodford to Caboolture fairly direct?
Yes, so it stops at Diagula, Wamuran, and then comes into Caboolture and does the King Street, I do believe. It used to go straight to the railway station, but I don't know if it does anymore.
And so you said you would go to the hospital. Is it the Caboolture Hospital that
Yes.
you had your appointments at? So you would go from Woodford. You'd have to come into Caboolture because this is the hospital where you have your
Yes.
appointments. And then if you wanted to get the bus, say, from the station or Caboolture up to the hospital, because would you need another bus service
Yes,
to do that?
need another bus.
And did you ever have the misfortune to have to do that? And how
No,
long did
thank
you
God.
wait or anything like that?
No, I've been very lucky. I haven't had to rely on it because I pay for my support workers to be when I'm needed at appointments. So I'm very lucky. If I have to go to the Royal, there is no way knowing I can catch a train, and then you've got to get off at Bowen Hills, and then you've got to try and find a bus or a taxi over to the Royal.
So the signage between the station and then where the bus oversees which bus you've got to go, there's no indications on that?
Just little placards about as big as an A4 piece of paper.
It's not very clear, because certainly I was down at Petrie the other day, or Strathpine actually, at the council offices, and it's right next to the train station, and I couldn't figure out where the reception area was, and it's right there. It was so frustrating because I think, if anybody knows how to use a public transport system, it's me. So if you've got somebody who has maybe language issues, they don't speak English as their first language, they can't necessarily read and write in English either, and trying to figure out all these extra things.
It would almost be impossible for them. That's why most of them started walking. Once we reorganised the cars, because you've got to have a driver for the car, and that driver's got to be licensed. Then he's got to be mentioned on our insurance because it's our car. We had to then make him available because he might want to go into town. He might pick strawberries all day and be shot duck, so he might just want to go to bed, have a bowl of rice and go to bed. But the others might want to go into town, and they buy gifts to send home, and they love like sporting shirts and soccer balls and footballs and stuff that aren't readily available in their country. So it's quite daunting for them.
Because you have your business, that gives you a bit of extra income, so sufficient income to be able to have an NDIS person come on a regular basis. But if you didn't have those extra funds because of your business, how would you manage your transportation issues?
I'm lucky I'm on a reasonable package from the NDIS only because of where I live. I did have to fight to explain to them how I get around and why I need, like today, it's an hour you got to leave to drive from Woodford to here and find a park. So that's an hour I'm paying the support worker that really I'm not getting any benefit other than transportation. But when you talk to the NDIS or the government or Centrelink, they don't understand that I need that to get here to do this, or interview some people in the library, or whatever I'm doing, go to the hospital. The people that organise or plan the parking or the public transport need to hop in a wheelchair and then go and do it. I was lucky enough to be part of a group that went to the CPL, which is the Cerebral Palsy League. They have an employment arm, and I was lucky enough to go there and talk to them and some of their participants about transportation. All their representatives had to spend a day in a wheelchair.
Yeah, so I was actually thinking we should really get our transportation officers. I always think if you got all the directors and all the councillors to spend their first week in the job in a wheelchair, just discovering what's it like on the footpath, where are the ramps, I think you just get everything fixed up within a minute. It just changes because you're also not only having to deal with wheels, but you're also at a lower height. So what you can see is very different. And I think you're probably, before your accident, you're probably quite tall.
5'10" 3/4".
And so now your view is
Yes.
sort of more into somebody who's 10 or 11 or 12, I think, when you're in a chair, isn't it? So the other thing I was curious about, because you're in a wheelchair, my co-host, we're going to do the road rules for people in wheelchairs. What are the road rules for motorised wheelchairs? The road rules are actually the same for a wheelchair as they are for a pedestrian, but that sort of doesn't make sense in many instances. How have you found getting around in a wheelchair on the road, on footpaths, on bike lanes, all these sorts of things? How have you found any of that?
Terrible.
That's a very brief, like straight to the point, Michael, straight to the point.
The footpaths are not level, so they've got a little lip on most 2-foot sections or 3-foot sections. In a wheelchair, you feel that.
So one of the things I found out is the ridges and the camber, so the ridges, so that bunk, 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 bunk. If you're on a bicycle, it's bad enough, but a lot of people are in a wheelchair because they're in physical pain. Did you experience that?
So I have bursitis in both my shoulders. It didn't flare up until I was in a wheelchair. That's because it's a different motion than it is to walking. Played a lot of tennis in my life, and that's using your shoulders a lot, but nothing compares to pushing your own weight on a footpath that's unlevel, wrong camber. It's shooting you into the drain all the time, or it'll go so far with concrete and then it's just grass. I know. Or you get to the end and then there's just a hard curb, not a ramp. You can actually report those for accessibility issues through SnapSense. Moreton Bay Council uses that app and it's great. You can just take a photo and say this is an accessibility issue, and that then goes into the infrastructure list for works to be done. I've got an electric wheelchair as well as a mobility scooter. So if I want to go to the pool in Woodford, I can go on my electric wheelchair, but I go on my mobility scooter. I had big fights with the local constabulary because they wanted me to be on the footpath. Yep. And I said, it's too rough. Yeah. It's dangerous. And he said, well, you're a danger out here on the road. And it's only a little slip road. Yeah. I don't know if you know Woodford, but... I've never been there because I have never been to Woodford. I've basically hardly been outside of Caboolture because it's so hard to get around outside Caboolture. There's no bike lanes. You can't get a bus anywhere. We don't have a car. So basically, you can be rest assured, I have barely gone outside Caboolture or Morayfield, and even down to Morayfield is a major journey. So no, I've never been there because it's just so difficult. So it has the main highway going through town, which is the Diagonal Highway. Then it has a street either side, which is Archer Street. It's like a slip road, there's houses along it. I just zoom along there. My mobility scooter has headlights and taillights and indicators, and it is registered so I can do what I do on it. However, I did have to fight. He was going to give me a ticket, which I found quite imposing because I'm only just trying to get to the pool. You know what I mean? I can understand why they did that, because initially it would have been those small little wheelchairs where people didn't have them motorised, and so that's why they would have been on the footpath rather than the road. But now they're sort of almost like mini golf carts. They are bigger and they're more sturdy, they're safer. You can use them and it's great to be able to use it. But of course, you do have a lot of people driving quite quickly, and a lot of drivers get very frustrated very quickly. There is this idea that because it's a road, only cars should be on the road, which isn't true. You know, people can ride bikes and scooters on the road. And if we slowed the road speed down to, slip road, is that currently a 50? Yeah, it's 50. It is. If you can get that down to 30, like if that's something the council did, you would be able to use that road and feel safe, because when people go at 50 kilometres an hour in their car, they're looking for other cars, and that's what makes it dangerous. If the road is designed to be at 30, and this is what is happening in the UK and many other countries around the world, they've brought it down to 30, then what that means is people who are driving cars start looking for people rather than big machines. It reduces the collision rates hugely. So if something like that were done, how would that change your sense of safety on the road? Well, I would take it a step further. That's a route that children used to go to school. There's plenty of land there. If the council extended the roadway, they could put a bike lane in, and then everybody would be safe.
So is it a one lane on both sides?
Yeah.
Or it's one lane on either side?
one way either side.
Yeah.
So there's no two-way traffic, but the amount of land that they have available there if they wanted to, and Woodford's only growing. Here it's a little bit different. In Caboolture, not bad sorts of pavements, although I have been on some absolute shockers. Again, I'll say people who make decisions need to make them from a wheelchair.
I have this idea that we get all the senior executives from the Transport and Main Roads, all the people who are from this region, all the senior directors, and they just spend a whole week just doing transport in a wheelchair for a week and just to see what it's like. You know, they have those homeless sleep outs that get all the CEOs to look at homelessness. Something like that. But for transportation, I think that would start to really shift things.
I'm sure it would shift things because a lot of people, I go to a lot of networking events, a lot of people look over the top of you because I'm down here now, I'm not up there where they can see me. But there's no real consideration when you're in a wheelchair. Like I have people pushing in front of me at Macca's or was at the pub the other night having tea, went to the bar to get a drink, someone pushed in front of me. I'm old school, I was brought up to be, correct's not the word, but be aware of your surroundings and others in your surroundings. You be courteous and polite wherever you can.
And I definitely think what I notice now that I don't drive and I'm stuck in Caboolture, you know, with such bad transportation, because I've lived in lots of different places where the transportation is actually quite good. So I don't want to drive everywhere. I don't like driving because I find it makes me a horrible person. That's one of the many reasons. I'm not a very good driver, and I would say now that I don't have so much time in a car, I see the world very, very differently to how I used to see it. And I used to be much more aggressive. I've just changed my ways for a variety of reasons, my own personal desire to be less aggressive. When you look back to your, I presume it was some kind of accident, or you don't have to talk about it.
It was health related. So.
Okay. Before you ended up in a wheelchair, did you understand the situation for people in wheelchairs? How did that change the way that you viewed the way that you move in the landscape?
I'm not going to say lucky, but I've been aware of the plight of people in a wheelchair since 1975. My best mate at school contracted a disease which shrunk his muscles, and he was then in a wheelchair at school. So I was very mindful of what the world was from his point of view. So we're still mates today. I'm one of the very few mates that still keeps in contact with him. He's currently a Paralympian. He hasn't let the chair rule his life. In answer to your question, I was already pretty comfortable with what I was getting into. A lot of people have said to me, oh geez, you've taken into being in a wheelchair quite well. In your stride, they always say, and I go, yeah, well, you need two legs to have a stride. So I've had that in my life since 1975, which is a long time. However, nothing prepared me for pavements, the handicap parks at Bunnings. We all know how busy Bunnings is. Doesn't matter what day of the week you go. You park in the wheelchair, in the handicap park, and you've got to go out onto the roadway. It doesn't matter how safe the car park is or how wide it is. You have to go onto the roadway, and people are not looking for a wheelchair.
No,
at Bunnings.
No, I'm always amazed that they can do design like that. Is there anything else you feel that we haven't discussed that you would like to add?
I think I'd just reiterate what I said about local, state, federal governments need to look at commissioning an ambassador or a commissioner to have a look at car parks and access from car parks and access to government buildings, because it doesn't matter what they think a ramp to a door. So the ramp is probably more than 30 degrees, maybe closer to 40 degrees, and then at the top of the ramp you've got to pull the door outwards to get into it. You've got to try and hold yourself and hold the door and then let yourself go backwards down a ramp to open the door to then try and hold the door and get up the ramp again.
Yeah, that's nuts. It's like that thing I had a couple of years ago. It was actually in Sydney when I was living in Sydney, and I had a problem with my foot. I think I had a melanoma removed from my foot, so I was on crutches everywhere. And then I went, walking to the barriers, getting to the lift in the platform, and they go, oh yeah, we're changing the platforms. I'm going, oh my goodness. And I couldn't see from the lift which platform, which train to be on which platform on the board. And then they go, oh no, we're changing it over. So I was going, oh no. And the time it takes to travel when you're in a wheelchair is so much more than people realise. Certainly much more than I realised. I mean, you had more experience than me in that regard.
I was working in the city, in the heart of the city. I was catching the train into the city. I've got to give Queensland Rail staff a plug. They were very, very mindful of who I was, where I was, always asking at which station you get off. I got to know all the guys at Morayfield Station. The reason I used to go to Morayfield Station is because the lift at Caboolture Station to get across to the other platform breaks down more times than it's working. And I actually got told by Queensland Rail staff, if you're catching the train regularly, go to Morayfield because the chances of you getting stuck in the lift are very high.
So I know that Caboolture Station is due for an upgrade, but I was like, oh great, we're heading up to the top of the list. We're still several years away, and then what's it like for people who are left in this situation? Now I have officially given you your magic wand, and this is your wish list for transportation in Caboolture, Morayfield or Queensland to be able to get around. So you didn't have to worry about having to get someone to drive you there. You could make your way, you could be independent of asking it for an NDIS person to come, and she's here with us in the room and she's very lovely. Yeah, you could just organise that because you lived an independent life for your transportation needs. What would you wish?
Like we've discussed 3 or 4 times now, the people that are making the decisions about footpaths and parks and whatever they're doing, ramps, Champion, have used that in a wheelchair and negotiated that. Because if you have, I find it very hard to believe that you would tick that box to say, oh yeah, that's all compliant.
And so in terms of bus services?
It would depend where you live. Like I live at Woodford, so the bus service is there, it's a convenience. I would hate to depend on it.
Yeah, so you would like to see a more regular service?
Yes, I'd like to see a better place for the bus to stop because the gutter is quite pronounced.
Yep, so it's actually very difficult when you're in a wheelchair?
Yes, if push come to shove, I could come to Caboolture on my mobility scooter, but I'd have to bring me charger and charge it to get home.
You could do it if there were charging points along the way.
Yes.
How long would it take you? Might take you 3 hours.
Yeah, wouldn't want to be a pressure day.
But say for instance you didn't live up at Woodford but you lived halfway between here and Woodford, you could then use a charging point a couple of times along that way. And yeah, fantastic, along the footpath, which is a lovely smooth footpath.
Yes, it is lovely smooth.
Yeah, if they can make a road smooth, they can make a footpath smooth. They just won't spend the money, I think. I don't know what that deal is.
No, I don't either.
All right. So that's it. Anything, final words, anything else you would like to say? Anything, last wishes?
Thanks, Wendy, for the opportunity to be on your podcast.
That's my pleasure. I think we've had a great convo.
My 12-year-old is busting. She's already sent me 2 messages. Send me the link, Dad. Send me the link. So, like I said at the beginning, I'm quite chuffed that you thought to get some specks of wisdom from me about life in a wheelchair. People think you're lazy because you sit down all day. It isn't the case, especially if you're wheeling yourself. But yeah, thanks, Wendy. I appreciate it, and I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. It's been so lovely, and thank you for arranging the room, and also your lovely carer who's sitting here in the room, who was sitting there silently. Thank you very much, both of you. I think this is exactly what we need to really get the word out about. So thank you very, very much. It's been very generous. It's been an honour.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward, Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E, there's no hyphen in that, .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.